Third-party content has been copied and communicated pursuant to Part 5A or 5B of the Copyright Act, unless indicated otherwise.
Thank you. Listen, for anyone who doesn't watch the show regularly, we usually have 4 people here on a panel, but once in a while we get someone who has so much to say that we figure the other 3 people won't get in a word in edgewise anyway. So we do a one-on-one, and this person certainly is deserving. If you have not been aware of the contribution she has made to the feminist debate in the last 10 years, you really have not been paying attention. She is the professor of humanities at Philadelphia's University of the Arts. Her book, Sexual Personae, broke a lot of new ground, and this is her new one, Vamps and Tramps. Welcome, Camille Paglia. Hey, baby.
Hi,
Sit down. Okay. Dating do's and don'ts. No, I'm just kidding about that. Let me start off by asking you this. I'm trying to find some common ground with this, and I think we do have a lot. But I hope so.
Yeah.
But very often people ask me, politically incorrect, what does that mean? They think it means conservative because politically correct means liberal. And I always say, well, I am conservative on some things, but really what I want to do is give liberalism a good name. I think political correctness gave it a bad name.
Correct.
Would you say the same thing about feminism, what you were doing for feminism? You think it got a bad name, now you want to get it on the right track?
I agree with you, because I hate dogma in any form. I left the Roman...
I hate dog There's common ground right there. And I think you just proved women are smarter than men. Good night.
I left the Roman Catholic Church 25 years ago because I could not stand the suppression of free thought and free speech by the nuns and so on. And so to my horror, I as a 60s libertarian, to my horror, when the feminist movement lurched in a kind of Stalinist direction in the 1970s, I was appalled. In fact, I was drummed out of the feminist movement from the start, arguing about the Rolling Stones. It's a famous, huge argument. They were screaming at me. I loved the song Under My Thumb. I consider the Rolling Stones the greatest rock band, and Under My Thumb is a sexist song, but this group of feminist musicians, this is 1969, 1970, they're saying to me, they're bad musicians because they're sexist. I'm going, whoa, 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 whoa. They may be sexist, but they're great musicians. So there was a kind of Stalinist insistence that art conform.
But do you also agree with the message of the song? Because in the song, which I also happen to like, at least musically, but I mean, he says, you know, she only speaks when she's spoken to.
But if you really look at the lyrics, you'll see that once she had him down, okay, it's a cycle.
Yeah.
All right, now he's got her down, but the implication is that's an eternal cycle ever moving, and that she'll have the upper hand, like, you know, next week.
The implication is she dated him before Satisfaction was a hit.
But rock and roll should never be politically correct, okay? I hate this kind of grunge, PC music, okay, which wants to be nice to women. Excuse me, you know, the greatest rock creations have come out of lust and aggression, which I'm trying to encourage. We need more of that.
Okay, we're back. Let me get the basic feminism stuff out of the way, because I want you to address this about, let's talk about what the actual guy in the street, because that's what really matters. I mean, he doesn't read your books. Let's be honest. He doesn't. It's too, you know, I mean, frankly, it's a little tough for me. I mean, you're a professor. You're a smart...
They see me on TV. They stop me in the street.
And that's okay.
They stop me in the street. They say, give him hell, girl.
That's right.
They do.
And they get the big message. And I think you do speak a lot for what men want to hear. But, I mean, if you talk to the average man in the street, I mean, and you say feminism, what does he think? He thinks, excuse me, but hey, a bunch of angry dykes who couldn't get laid and they ruined it for everybody. Right? Not me necessarily, but I'm just saying the average, he thinks angry, they think men are you know, men are bums, and everything has to be political, and hear me roar.
Well, the time for confrontation with men was real. It was there. Late 60s, early 70s. I myself, I was a forerunner, okay? I have kicked men, I have punched men, I have broken my umbrella over the head of men, and so on. I'm an open lesbian, okay? I express my anger with men directly. I do not have to get into a group and whine about men. What I hate about the feminist establishment, there are a bunch of women who use men as a social escort service, okay? A lot of the leading feminists, they're never without a man, okay? All right? They use them, and then they bitch in their books about men, okay? So I think that now, here it is, like it's the 90s, all right, and we're not 30 years down the line now, and we can say the time for hostility toward men in feminism is over. It's time to reconcile, to find common ground, all right, for 21st century feminism has got to let men find their own voices. This is the point, okay? I think the men's movement is very positive. It's up to men to define themselves. Men can't be like waiting for women to give them a laundry list. Okay, be this, be this, be this. No, we do not want men like women. We do not want castrated men.
Have you read this, How to Win and Hold a Mate?
No, I have not. That's fascinating.
Okay, welcome back with Camille Paglia. Let me throw some issues at you that we've done on this show before, politically incorrect issues, because you're the only one who probably will ever agree with me on some of these.
Yeah.
Women always say, you always hear that rape is not about sex. They always say it's a violent act. I always said, no, it's a sexual act.
That's right.
And you think I'm right about that?
Absolutely, it's absurd. In fact, when I came on the scene, 5 years ago, you heard that like a mantra on TV. Rape is a crime of violence, but not of sex. That is a stupid statement. Okay, there is something that is lust. Right? There is something that is barbaric behavior. That my most famous rape essay begins: "Rape is an outrage that cannot be tolerated in civilized society." Having said that, okay, I want to say that I think that most women cannot understand what's going on in kind of the primitive mind. I don't know what, again, because of my deviant mental status. I don't know what it is. I've always been able to understand extreme criminal behavior, rape, murder, and so on. And I have said, I see with the eyes of the rapist. Okay, so yeah.
Because you said that if you were raped, you would not press charges. You would say that it just meant that you misread the signals.
Well, on a date, I'm saying I think a date is an encounter between two sexual beings, and,
right.
and I follow the gay male philosophy. Gay men, something goes wrong on a date, they don't run to a grievance committee the next day. Oh, help me! Oh, slap the person on the hand. Gay men are adults. They take responsibility for their behavior. Okay, a lot of gay men I know have gotten beaten up and everything else. They don't whine.
Well, let's talk about date rape.
Yeah, I'm a teacher. 23 years I'm teaching. Okay, so when I'm talking about date rape, I'm talking about from the perspective of someone who has dealt with freshmen for years, and therefore my views about the caution that's necessary for young women when they go out on a date and so on. I believe I'm closer to reality than a lot of these effete literati who disagree with me from the establishment in New York who never taught a class in their lives.
Oh, Christ, I was going to get in there. Hey, people, when I have an opening, shut up and let me, okay? Just do me a favor.
I feel a bad reduction. I think people can be convinced, going from a no to a yes.
Really?
I've learned a lot from movies, especially the great foreign films. I mean, a lot of my view of sexuality comes from the great studio era, the glamorous women, Hedy Lamarr, and so on, whose sexuality is and look at the great women. Compare Meryl Streep or Meg Ryan, barf, okay, to Anouka May, okay, Jean Moreau, Catherine Deneuve, Monica Vitti, the great Stefano Dron, the great stars of European cinema.
Right. You don't like the Meryl Streep. You don't like the ones who have renounced glamour, right? You say women made a big mistake.
Big mistake. Hollywood is about glamour. The minute you had that kind of working actor, very moralistic style of Meryl Streep, a shunning Hollywood thing, you got the supermodels. The supermodels are now the world carriers, transmitters of the old Hollywood glamour.
Now, you're bisexual.
I certainly am.
Okay. First of all, doesn't it get tiresome to have to check out everybody's ass? That's my first question. I mean, it turned out Woody Allen was right when he said it doubles your chances for a date on Saturday night, because you wound up with a woman. You have a companion now who's a woman.
My best things are with women.
Was it just chance that it was a woman? Could it have just as easily been a man that you wound up with?
I sleep with men, but I don't fall in love with men. Okay, I'm very lascivious in general. It's a great entertainment factor. If every single person you see on the street, you can cruise. I mean, it's wonderful. Yeah.
And speaking of cruise, let me ask you this: if you had your choice, Tom Cruise or Nicole Kidman?
I cannot cannot choose. I cannot choose.
Really? They're both equally attractive to you?
No, I think Tom Cruise is more attractive to me, I think.
All right, that's one for the men.
Though I'm concerned, like in Vamps and Tramps in the new book, I talk about the fact that I don't think that a lot of this current homosexuality is necessarily positive homosexuality. I think a lot of it is being caused by the alienation between the sexes. I want women to turn back to men. I really do. I don't want them to be exclusively with men. I want them to to remain bisexual. But I think that men are shrinking. The more they do what feminists want, the more they shrink.
Well, men are shrinking. On that note, I have to cut you off. I know you have very little to say, but somehow we'll catch some more conversation out of you tomorrow night when we'll continue our special one-on-one with Camille Collier.
Except that I do feel that that nature puts hormones in us that kick in at puberty, that drive the sexes together. Also, so what I'm saying is that, as a cultural historian, that I do not see much evidence throughout history of exclusive homosexual relationships among adults. That what you get is married men, as in classical Greece, going to female prostitutes, and then boy love. All right, that's what you get in most of the history of the world. So what I'm saying is that we have to explain why adult men are not attracted at all to women, or why adult women are not attracted at all to men. I hate the kind of, for example, the kind of defamation of the penis that goes on regularly in lesbian feminism. In fact, Vamps and Tramps begins with a transcript of a book of a program I did in England, The Penis Unsheathed. Now, how many lesbians would celebrate the glories of the penis? Okay, on British TV?
4. Four. I mean, the top's 4. But wait a minute. But wait a second. Let me take issue with this basic thing about you say everybody has a homosexual in them. That's the to me, that is the oldest gay comment in the world. Is that you?
I'm talking about as sort of an attitude of bisexual experimentation. In fact, I think that if you study art history, you are kind of being tutored in an attitude of bisexual responsiveness to the beautiful female bodies and the beautiful male bodies in the history of art. So I just want, I want people to be open. But a little sex play here and there, what would it hurt? Would it kill you?
No, but you have also said that you don't think homosexuality is natural. Isn't that true?
No, I'm saying exclusive homosexuality on the adult level. I'm talking about just random sex play.
Right. I have
a little polymorphous, perverse, roll in the hay.
You say
now and then.
You say exclusive lesbianism is emotional retardation.
Well, that's not an exact quote, but I do. It's
pretty close.
Unfortunately.
As much as I could fit on the card. You do talk awfully fast, okay? I mean, I was trying to write it down at the time. And
actually, in No Law in the Arena, which is the main essay of Vamps and Tramps, I talk at length about my disappointment in lesbian feminism. For example, my disillusion with Martina Navratilova, who's the great Amazon queen, of the 70s and so on.
I thought she was a tennis player. Listen, I have to take a break. We will continue with this when we get.
I think that we're in a period of very politicized gay activism now, where people are saying, you're born gay. I don't believe for a minute you're born gay. Okay? My working hypothesis is that homosexuality is an adaptation to, in some cases, to environmental pressures and so on. I'm coming out of the period of Freud where you were able to analyze your relation to your mother and your father. I don't know a single gay person, male or female, that doesn't have some peculiar relation to the parental figures. Now, again, I'm celebrating homosexual expression, and I'm part of the Stonewall liberation movement and so on, but I'm tired of just blaming George Bush and the Republicans for everything that comes down the pike. I believe that self-knowledge is the ultimate human principle. Socrates' great maxim and so on. So I want gay people to start inquiring again. Why are you alienated from the opposite sex? Why? There is an alienation that...
I don't know, but Socrates was taking it.
Well...
I mean, let's be honest. I mean...
Socrates was nagged by his wife, Xanthippe, okay? And in fact, in his one opportunity to have his way with the beautiful Alcibiades, refuses. And actually, sexual renunciation seems to be Socrates' philosophy. It may not have been Plato's, okay, but it was Socrates.
But you are in a relationship now.
Yes, for a year and a half.
For a year and a half with a woman?
Yes.
And now, I don't, forgive my ignorance, but I don't know that much about, as I said, homosexual relationships. But I mean, who wears the strap-on in your family? I mean, or does that would advocate?
No, I don't think it's wrong, because I think that men need to be centered. I think there's always a woman behind the throne, and this was true in the period of the French kings. It's known that the great courtesans were running the French court. I mean, the kings were like half dead from syphilis.
If you can get at that... If you can get power that way, as a woman, and you can, obviously.
I believe in all forms of power. I believe in the bitch. In fact, my essay, an article, an interview I did about Hillary in London 2 years ago was called "Kind of a Bitch: Why I Like Hillary." It's in there.
So you were kind of a...
Oh, Mrs. Gingrich wasn't even thinking about bitch before I was, I was on the map with it a long time ago.
You and Newt, there would be a power couple.
I came on the scene. The sexual power that women have over men, feminist rhetoric has never been fair to this. I mean, men have to knock themselves out to get a woman's attention, and men have performance anxiety right into the act. I mean, if suddenly the waterworks fail, hey, okay, humiliation, city there, okay. We're talking about serious suicide, harakiri, okay, right? You get the woman into bed and nothing happens, zilch, okay, she tells you it's all right. No.
You have so many words for that, it's going to happen to me now.
No. Well, I want to bring phallic worship back because I'm following the gay male. I'm saying I've learned. I mean, I love gay male magazines. I love gay male porn. Okay, because it shows the beauty of the male body and the beauty of the penis and all of its modulations. I love it.
Okay.
And lesbians are incapable of really doing hot porn.
Okay, we will talk about porn and penises and men, and we'll talk about them.
Got a problem with any of this?
All right, we'll leave that there for the time being. That was Camille Paglia with Bill Maher on a show called Politically Incorrect. Is that working? Yep, 2. I think it's interesting because it sort of touches on some of the issues we've been talking about in previous weeks and sort of looks forward to this week's as well, which is the topic of same-sex marriage, the same-sex debate. And I guess it's interesting to hear a little bit about what homosexuality is, what might be behind it, what might be behind bisexuality, by somebody who is a sort of a professor and a sort of somebody who's intervened in the sex wars and the feminist debates in the mainstream in America, and is a bisexual herself, lesbian/bisexual, sort of probably slightly on the lesbian side of bisexuality, but open to heterosexuality as well. And somebody who's, as I was sort of saying, has read some Nietzsche and read some Freud, and you can sort of see that there's a degree of honesty that no one usually gives you. Like, she sort of confesses to be able to speak from the perspective of the deviant mind, and it's sort of what happens after reading sort of psychoanalysis for a while. It's kind of like it unlocks all your inner perversity, and you can sort of and there is actually references to Socrates as well, the idea of self-knowledge, and you sort of get a little bit sort of more candid and open about human nature than most people. So I think that makes her an interesting figure. I don't necessarily endorse absolutely everything she says. She's flying off the seat of her pants a lot of the times, but I think she offers interesting food for thought, which would be interesting as a sort of way onto this week's topic. All right, this week's topic. We'll look at philosophical issues raised by the global debate over same-sex marriage. We'll consider arguments for same-sex marriage by its proponents, as well as arguments against. And some of the arguments for are going to come from queer theorists, so it's going to be something maybe you haven't seen much of before. They're kind of interesting. And the arguments against are going to come from natural law theorists, who are these days calling themselves natural lawyers, lawyers of nature. The essential reading is Halwani's Chapter 10, Controversies over Same-Sex Marriage. And this is our last chapter on Halwani too. So we're sort of giving Halwani a fitting send-off as well. We're going to sort of go through it. We're going to see what he has to offer on this subject. I mentioned that this might have been, as in my opinion, as good as his previous chapter. And after reading, I said, I think his previous chapter is better than this one. But I think this chapter is still very, very revealing. It still finishes off with a big bang. The intro clip, that was Paglia and Bill Maher on Politically Incorrect. You can find that on YouTube if you want to watch the whole thing. I just sort of skipped through it just not to take up the whole lecture. This right image, we have it's a vase painting from 380 BC, and that's Tiresias. He was a seer, like a prophet in Homeric times, who was sex changed, or was made to have a sex change into a woman as punishment for striking copulating snakes. So he saw snakes copulating and he hit them with the stick. And I think Hira sort of took offence to this, zap, and then he became a woman and lived his life as a woman for many years. Some say he was married and had kids as a woman. Some say he was a temple prostitute. And later on, he saw copulating snakes again, and instead of hitting him, he just walked around him respectfully. And Hira, I think, was the guy that said, okay, he's learned his lesson. So zap, changed him back into a man again. And there he is. He's been a woman. He's been a man. He's been a woman. He's back to a man. And I've speculated here that does this mean now he has knowledge of both sides? Is he, like Diotima says, somewhere between the two, between the masculine and the feminine? And maybe the bisexual person also, or the homosexual person in some ways, is between the two as well. Maybe they see things from both sides. Does that give them extra knowledge, extra insight? Camilla Paglia might be someone who's an example of that too. She's conceived from both sides. Does that give you extra insight? Right? Tiresias was actually then blinded by Hera for revealing too much, because Zeus and Hera were quarrelling, as they always do, and over who enjoys sex more. Zeus was saying women, Hera was saying men, so they asked Tiresias, well, he's been both, and he says women enjoy sex 10 times more, and Hera said, that's not good enough, zap, you've given away our secret, sort of thing. That's sort of one of the myths that comes along. And so, he's blind, but as sort of, Hera then feels sorry for him, so he gives him the gift of prophecy so he can tell the future. And so when Odysseus goes to the underworld, he goes to see Tiresias because he's trying to get back to Ithaca. And Tiresias famously tells Odysseus to take a well-cut oar and go on till he reaches a people who know nothing of the sea and don't even use salt with their food. So perhaps that's what Halwani's going to do for us now. He's going to reach us, the people who know nothing of the sea. We'll see. All right, Halwani on same-sex marriage. He starts off by listing the places that currently allow it, as of his 2010 time of writing. Holland, which was the first, Norway, Sweden, Belgium. So you see the Scandinavian countries, or the Northern European countries are going first. Spain, Southern Europe. Canada, South Africa, some of the former English colonies. And the US, the states of Connecticut, Iowa, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. This is all done recently. So this is all 21st century stuff. Holland, I think, was 2001. Right? But today, because this is just in the 3 years since Halwani's written this, I just did a quick Google search, we can add in the US, New York State, Rhode Island State, Maryland, Washington, the countries Denmark and Ireland, starting with Northern Europe, Portugal, Southern Europe, Argentina, New Zealand, and France. Argentina, former Spanish colony, New Zealand, former English colony, and France, sort of, which is kind of north and south, because it's got England on the top and Mediterranean down the bottom. Australia, no. Both the libs and the labs say no. Can we do a quick vote? Can I have a show of hands of who thinks same-sex marriage should be legalised in Australia? All right, that's a lot of people. Who thinks same-sex marriage should not be legalised in Australia? 2, 3, okay. Thank you for your honesty. Who is kind of undecided or indifferent? All right, cool. Okay, that's good. So I know basically where I'm pitching to. Okay. But anyway, this is a hot topic, right? Because in Australia, the decision is currently still no, although they're all kind of shifting around a little bit. They're saying, there may be a conscience vote after the election, maybe we'll get it in, blah, blah, blah. So, and it's a recent phenomenon. Okay, now, Halwani lists 4 logical positions on same-sex marriage, right? Those who are for gay marriage and generally for the gay lifestyle, okay? So if you're not homophobic, if you don't dislike gays, you might say, well, then it's only fair that they should be able to get married, right? That's one position. Second position is people who are against gay marriage and against gay. So if you don't like gays and the gay lifestyle, then you think, therefore, they should not have marriage, right? Now, third position, this is like one of the most interesting ones, against gay marriage but for gays. So you're for gays, nothing against them, nothing against their lifestyle. You might even be gay yourself, but you're against gay marriage. We're going to look at somebody called Claudia Card, because Halwani does, towards the end of this lecture, and she's an example of that. And I think that's where we get something very interesting philosophically going on. The fourth position is you're for gay marriage, but against gays. Now, Halwani says this is really only a view that's held by comedians or expressed for the purpose of comedy, which is, why should only straight people suffer for marriage? Let gays suffer too. Right? So it's sort of having a dig at marriage. But it's a nice one, because it's like, is marriage that much fun? It's kind of playing on that a little bit. Let's not get too high and mighty about it. Now, he notes, just to get back to seriousness, that marriage confers certain legal benefits on individuals in a couple, right? Benefits thus denied to gay individuals in gay coupling. So sort of making a point about fairness there. And he also notes that some think gay marriage is immoral because the gay sex act itself is immoral. Right? Really? Who? Well, let's find out. Bring on the natural lawyers. Now, the natural lawyers, or natural law theorists, are against same-sex marriage. A question to ask is, what notion of nature do they presuppose? Is it accurate or distorted? How do they represent nature? All right? They claim to be acting in accordance with natural law. What do they mean by nature? What's the relation? What's the law? All right? That's a question to keep in mind. Not just for natural law theorists, but anyone who's making an argument from or against nature even. Now, Halwani tracks the natural lawyers back to Thomas Aquinas, who's pictured on the right. Okay? The medieval Catholic priest-theologian who, among other things, welded Aristotle to the Bible. The other, I think, probably sort of semi-philosophical interesting Christian philosopher is probably Augustine, who was just at the start of when Christianity came in, probably around the 4th century AD or just after. And his influence was more Plato. He was sort of marrying Christianity with Plato, and Aquinas sort of puts the emphasis more on Aristotle. So, and he's sort of, a bit later. So I think he's around the 13th century or 12th century, sort of before the Renaissance happens, but heading towards it. Right. Now, this is Aquinas' position. Natural laws are handed down by the Creator God at the centre of the universe. Right? So already we sort of see his notion of nature has God in the middle of it. Right? God made it. God runs it. It's that sort of idea. The natural laws that he's talking about are moral normative laws. So he's not talking about laws of like gravity and stuff like that, although they are, according to their theories, usually designed by God as well. But here they're talking about God's moral laws or normative laws, right, which are accessible by reason, by tuning into reason, but also violable, i.e. we have some free will in relation to them, right? In other words, you don't have to listen to these rules. Like you can't sort of disobey gravity, right? What goes up must come down. But you can choose not to listen to God's moral laws because you've got free will, and that's the whole thing about, life testing your faith, and then when you go to the afterlife, then you sort of get judged by that. So that's sort of the way the natural law theorists think about it. Now, what's he say about homosexual sex? They're wrong, right? That's his position. Because sex acts are wrong if they are non-procreative. If a sex act does not lead to babies, according to Aquinas, it's wrong. But not just gay sex. It's oral sex, anal sex, animal sex, masturbation sex, right? And it's also wrong if with the wrong party, i.e. incest, rape, adultery. I couldn't help noting here that children are included in that list, where you think a Catholic today would put that right at the start, given the trouble they're having. But I'm not saying Aquinas left it out himself, but in this account, Halwani doesn't mention if Aquinas mentions whether children are out. I presume they think so. Only marital sex for the purpose of children, for having children, not for getting access to children, presumably. Only marital sex for the purpose of children is moral for Aquinas, right? And as an extension, only the rhythm method is allowed for contraception. And these views still form the basis of the Catholic Church. Actually, Bill Maher uses it as an example, for those who think religion doesn't harm anybody, uses the example of the Pope going into AIDS-infested, African countries and telling them, no, you can't use condoms, that's not the Christian way. So that's, it's one of the issues that the Catholic Church has to deal with at the moment, along with all the pedophilia that's going on. All right, now, Halwani notes there are 3 new natural lawyers, John Finnis, Germaine Grisez, Robert George, obviously they're household names, I don't even know how to say them. Now, they still claim any non-penis and vag sex outside of marriage is immoral, right? Only the procreative form of the act is moral because it creates a union, a oneness. It creates one from two. That's what the new natural lawyers are claiming. Other acts of sex they think are disintegrating because it's using the body as a mere tool for pleasure as a means to an end. So it's a kind of almost a Kantian thing they're putting on there. They conclude that gay marriage should not be legalised because it involves the non-procreative form of the act, i.e. homosexual sex, and is thus immoral. Page 281. So most of you are going to disagree with that, probably even the ones who are not for same-sex marriage might still disagree with that. But let's see what Halwani says. Now, Halwani objects because, one, these natural laws assert a definition of marriage but don't argue for it. He thinks they're just saying, marriage by definition is for a man and a woman. The procreative sex form is, by definition, the only moral one. But he doesn't really reckon they really give a good argument for it, probably because they can't actually prove that God is real. So if you don't believe the God, then you've got really no reason to back their story. I think that's what Halwani's kind of trying to say there. And he's saying, look, two people aren't literally made one by a penis in vagina. He's saying it's just a figure of speech. Like they're not literally one person, like in Aristophanes' myth. You could sort of reverse that too and say, well, why isn't a penis in a mouth or a penis in an anus or a fist or a finger in a vagina like making one? It's still, part of one body going into another. So Halwani doesn't go to that, but you could extend it into that sort of area. He says it's unclear why pleasure is disintegrating. Right? He sort of doesn't think this idea really makes too much sense. It's reckoned it's too anti-pleasure. I've written here, sounds like another paranoid fear campaign. Once you enjoy pleasure, next thing you know, it's anarchy, run for the hills. And then he mentions that sterile and infertile heteros have non-procreative sex using the procreative form. So even though they're using the procreative form, penis in vagina, no kids are going to emerge from it. And why isn't that considered immoral? Why can they still get married? That's what he's saying. I've added here, so do heteros using the rhythm method. Like they're purposefully using the procreative form to not have procreative sex. So why is that suddenly okay? And Halwani sort of refers back to his three moral theories, virtue ethics, deontology, and consequentialism, to say, look, they don't exclude gay sex. They don't rule out gay sex as being immoral. According to these three moral theories. All right. Now, one of the major arguments against same-sex marriage Halwani tackles is the slippery slope. Please ignore my funny photos down the bottom. Now, the causal version of this says, allowing same-sex marriage will cause other types of immoral and irregular marriage to be legalised too. Group marriage, group sex marriage, incest, interspecies, people marrying things, their slippers or their iPods, right? The other one is the lack of principles version, right? Which says, allowing same-sex marriage removes the principles we need to distinguish or exclude other forms of irregular or immoral marriages. So they're sort of similar, these two versions. They're just different emphasis, really. And, and they're saying, like, there are people already advocating for polygamy and polyamory marriage. It's a slippery slope, right? Today, same-sex marriage. Tomorrow, polyamory. Then it's like people marrying their dogs or their trees or their iPods or their slippers or their coffee tables or their favourite TV shows. Once the floodgates open, bang. That's the sort of argument that he's outlining and then going to evaluate. But he's actually, when it comes to polyamory, he's not convinced that is bad. And if you look at the chapter before this one, chapter 9, he goes through cases of polyamory and shows that or argues that, I won't preempt it, that they're not necessarily all bad. Like there can be situations where polyamory or polygamy seems to be okay, and he thinks we've just got to assess these on a case-by-case basis. In any case, he thinks we can find different good reasons. He thinks different good reasons can be used to reject other forms of marriage which may be inherently bad, like incest, right? So, you don't really need the same principle that applies to one thing to also apply to another. If you think incest is no good, just say that. It's nothing to do with homosexual marriage, is what he's sort of saying. Because he says, same-sex marriage has more in common with hetero marriage than it does with the other weirder possibilities, like marrying an iPod. An iPod's not a person, a gay or lesbian partner is. So he's sort of saying things like that. I reckon at this point he's classic. He's sort of cross, he's angry, he's rational, and he's funny all at the same time when he says, we are better off throwing this slippery slope argument in the philosophical trash bin. Whether a form of marriage is acceptable depends not on what other forms of marriage it would lead to, but on other considerations. For example, if we think that marriage between a man and a dog is unacceptable, this is not because it would lead to marriage between men and crickets or women and trees, but because marriage between humans and animals is not a good idea. So, whether same-sex marriage should be legalised or to be considered on its own merits. I reckon like your dog could be listening to this, right? And thinking, what? Oh, if it's just like slippery slope time, I'm not going to like marry my owner, I'm going to marry my favourite wee tree. That's what's going on there. All right. Now, this is what I think is really interesting in Halwani's chapter. The gay arguments against gay marriage. All right, so people obviously aren't against gays, because they are gay, but they're against marriage, or they're against gay marriage. First, it goes through some people arguing for same-sex marriage based on equality, fairness, dignity, respect, etc., etc. Fair enough, right? But not really a novel topic for philosophical interest. Philosophers want to sort of like, treat novel issues or hidden truths. So, enter Claudia Card, right? She's a lesbian philosopher who is against gay marriage. She thinks marriage itself is immoral, so why should we pursue equality with it? So she's against this idea of equality for equality's sake. She uses the example of black slaves. She goes, when there was black slavery, could a woman own a black slave? No. Was that inequitable for the woman? Yes. Should the woman thus pursue her right to own black slaves? She's like, no, because the institution of slavery itself is immoral, so we don't want to be equal with immoral stuff. So she's going to say, marriage is the same thing. It's an immoral institution, so why do we need equality with something that, is inequitable in nature? That's what she's saying. She has 4 issues with marriage. 1, it unfairly confers benefits all should have, like health insurance. This is like in America, I think, where they don't have universal health care, even now, and I'm not sure how good it is. And Halwani sort of responds, yeah, well, we could reform marriage so that it does, so that doesn't, it's not the only way to get health insurance, etc. But Carr's saying at the moment, that's unfair. Why should only married people get health insurance, right? 2, she says, marriage often leads to divorce, which has tragic effects. And because of that, some people then choose to stay in marriages, which are terrible marriages, which has equally tragic consequences. That's her second issue with it, all right? 3, she thinks monogamy is harsh and unnatural, and marriage is an inherently monogamous institution. 4, she thinks the law makes it hard to defend against violence from a spouse because it classes them together. She goes into a few legal examples there. Now, 2 interesting arguments from this perspective. One is the assimilation argument. I found this one interesting. Some queer theorists are afraid marriage will force them to conform to the mainstream and thereby undermine their unique and radical potential to be different and transform society. Right? So there's a sense where perhaps the queerness, right, can be a way back for all of us to uncover our polymorphous sense, which Puglia was saying at times, like, hey, nothing wrong with a bit of polymorphous play here and there. And these queer theorists are saying if we suddenly try and convert into the institution of marriage, we're suddenly going to be, just like them. Right? That's one of their sort of fears or complaints there. And similar to the cultural injustice argument, right? This queer theorist is saying, straight culture has much to learn from queer culture, such as the more porous and flexible division between couples and friends. Because queers often have an astonishing range of intimacies, many without labels. Why give them up or accept an institution which makes them second tier at best? So Halwani goes through, mentions a lot of homosexual or gay couples or lesbian couples have more open relationships. They can have a sort of system of friends, which have friends with benefits sort of attached to them, but still have their sort of main partner. So that's sort of interesting. And I guess the fear here is then once you become married, that suddenly you start thinking that's all bad, where maybe queer theorists have uncovered something more interesting, to more open access to polymorphous perversity at the base of the libido, and maybe they don't want to give them up. And for Halwani, he sort of almost jumps out of his sort of objective skin here and goes, this puts the final nail in the coffin of marriage. In the end, the elevation of marriage to the status it currently occupies seems to be entirely arbitrary. The product of a long historical process that has no proper moral justification. Right, so he's coming pretty harsh here against marriage, right? Maybe it's fair enough, maybe it's not. We'll get to think about this and discuss this in our tutes and our essays. Now, why is he saying this? He thinks because marriage is often about money, politics and procreation instead of love and commitment. Right. So you might say, okay. So he's sort of privileging love and commitment and saying that sometimes people get married for reasons that aren't those, for money or for politics or for recognition or for the purpose of producing babies for the state or the family or for themselves or whatever. All right. 2, he says, marriage is not the only relationship that can have love and commitment. All right, so it's similar to point 1. And 3, he thinks it's not the only proper child-rearing arrangement. He doesn't think you necessarily need a mother and father raising their own kid in a house, married, to provide a proper environment for raising kids. He concludes, the way is clear for individuals to live their lives as they see fit, to pursue their happiness without having to lead a second-tier way of life in society's eyes. So it's a sort of interesting position he comes to there. Like Bill Maher, I can't claim to know a whole lot about homosexual relations, but from what I do know, I remember I've visited a few gay clubs, and I was amazed, and overseas too, that often they'd have like an upstairs room or a back room or a dark room, and it's literally just an open orgy in there. And you walk in there and you go imagine if hetero clubs do this. Imagine if hetero clubs had this. You go in there and everybody's just basically going for it. There'll be literally 30 people in the room all having sex. And it was like, wow. They used to do that there was a club in, I don't want to get them in trouble, but there was a club in Collingwood called The Peel. They used to do it upstairs too. Apparently they don't anymore because once the police find out and they raid too much, they sort of shut it down. But that's an anecdotal sort of example I can give of one of the ways queer culture might be a little bit different. And they might still have their regular partner. That could just be their way of having fun. Then again, you do have swingers, hetero couples who are swingers too, but it might not be so free and open. I'm not sure. So anyway, just something to think about. As I said, I'm not an expert on that, but yeah. Okay, political question, right? Halwani thinks, he's talking about strategy here when he's talking about political question, right? He's saying, because marriage is glorified and confers benefits, right, gays should pursue it in the short term as a strategy, as it will lift their standing amongst the general community. So even though he thinks marriage is overrated, because the mainstream overrates marriage, he thinks by gays getting access to it is going to lift the standing of gays. So he says it's a short-term strategy. That's still okay, right? Even though in his view and the view of others, the institution itself is fundamentally flawed, unjust, arbitrary, and in some ways, and we may be better off without it someday. Thus, the long-term strategy, says Halwani, can still be to further reform and eventually abolish it. So he thinks getting marriage equality is a sort of short-term step, and it doesn't necessarily have to get rid of the long-term steps, which is trying to reform all the inequalities or injustices that are part of it, and then eventually maybe abolishing it, which he thinks will be better off, will be better off without it. So he's making a strong claim. But I've asked, why abolish, right? Why is he saying this? Why is Mr. Moderation suddenly saying, let's throw the whole institution out, right? This is very interesting. He thinks, unlike sexual desire and romantic love, right, there's nothing natural about marriage. This is his claim. He thinks it's a socially constructed institution through and through, and that today we might have better things to do and could spend political energy on other issues such as the US's lousy and unjust foreign policies, poverty, local and global, and the environment. So that last bit there is from a footnote which possibly came from Claudia Card. So that's an interesting claim. There's nothing natural about marriage. Is that true? No? Who thinks there's nothing natural about marriage? Okay, a few. Who thinks there is something natural about marriage? I've got a few, probably more on that one for those listening at home. All right, cool. That's interesting. So Halwani is sort of taking a position that might be a bit contrarian. Not the majority aren't quite with him, perhaps, on this one, if this is an indication. All right. So the next slide I've asked, is he too negative on marriage, right? Just start off on the left-hand column. Forgive the shaping around. It's just I don't want the font to get too small. Halwani's last paragraph of the whole book, when he concludes the whole book, all right, he gives marriage another decent spray. He calls it a totally socially constructed institution that has in the past served many nefarious and political goals, that discriminates against gay and polymorphous or polygamous groupings, wastes a mind-boggling amount of money to celebrate, only to end up in divorce more often than not. So he's giving a good spray, as they say in the footy. his last words, right? At the very least, this is quoting, marriage should be in the short term reformed to make divorce easier and its benefits universal. In the long run, if it goes away, so much the better. So I've asked the question, is this too negative or too one-sided? Now, probably more people in the room than not are thinking that, judging by the pop poll we just took there. So I found some Nietzsche where he's actually defending. It sounds like he's defending the logic of marriage. Perhaps he is, but I want to offer this as not necessarily a prescription, but a description of what the rationale of modern marriage traditionally was and was supposed to be, and then we'll decide what we think about it. We have to understand the logic first before we can assess it, right? Now, for Nietzsche, he says, should I start from the top? I'll start from here, right? Witness modern marriage. You can read the rest at home. All rationality has clearly vanished from modern marriage, yet that is no objection to marriage, but to modernity. Okay, so he is saying, like, there's something wrong with this modern way of thinking. No. The rationality of marriage, that lay in the husband's sole juridical responsibility, which gave marriage a centre of gravity, while today it limps on both legs. The rationality of marriage. That lay in its indissolubility in principle, which lent it an accent that could be heard above the accident of feeling, passion, and what is merely momentary. So it's completely opposite to Halwani. He says, okay, we'll have marriage, but make sure you can just get total divorce, like whenever you want. And like Nietzsche said, well, that's what's ruined marriage. That's what he's saying, right? Now, then he's saying, with the growing indulgence of love matches, the very foundation of marriage has been eliminated. That which alone makes an institution out of it. Halwani has been saying the opposite, that marriage is not about love, therefore abolish marriage. When Nietzsche's saying that, marriage maybe was doing something more important than the idea of romantic couplings, right? Never, absolutely never can an institution be founded on an idiosyncrasy. One cannot, as I have said, found marriage on love. It can be founded on the sex drive, on the property drive, wife and child as property, and I guess father and husband as well, like looking back the other way. On the drive to dominate, which continually organises for itself the smallest structure of domination, the family, and which needs children and heirs to hold fast. Physiologically too, I guess it's something to do with genetics, to an attained measure of power, influence and wealth, in order to prepare for long tasks, for solidarity of instinct between the centuries. Modern marriage has lost its meaning, consequentially, one abolishes it. So he thinks that's an objection to art today. Because we probably do need to talk about what he says at the start, because he thinks we've become irresponsible. We're all about freedom and pleasure, and any idea of authority sounds like a new slavery, and we're afraid of work, and we're afraid of structure, and we're afraid of the will to power. That's what Nietzsche thinks is going on here. So it's a critical. That's from Twilight of the Idols in a section called Expeditions of an Untimely Man. So he's making a slightly prescriptive claim. But we can just look at it as an understanding of what the logic was and then decide what we want to make of it. And I thought I'd go to some anthropology as well, because this is what Halwani doesn't really do. I got the impression he just said, marriage, ooh. And so I thought, well, I think we've got to do a bit better than that as philosophers, and look at people who try to understand the logic. And Levi-Strauss in Anthropology has done an interesting sort of job of this. With the alliance theory or general theory of exchanges, the structural method of studying kinship from his elementary structures of kinship work, oriented French anthropology for 30 years, influences felt in various fields, including psychoanalysis. It's based on the idea of a strong incest taboo and current beneath it. The incest taboo founds the passage from nature to culture. And weddings or marriage are part of that merry-go-round, that cycle that keeps it going, that links families together, right? So weddings are seen as a form of communication, a way to understand how inter-individual relations form and constitute a society. Based on the incest taboo, pushes groups towards exogamy, which pushes people to go searching for partners outside the inner kinship circle. Echoes Freud's totem and taboo, where you come up with a theory of the primal father. So a daughter, and it's sort of based on the fact that a daughter or sister is offered to someone outside a family circle, which starts a circuit of exchange. Because in return, the giver, like when the father gives away the daughter in marriage, right, for instance, in return, the giver is entitled to a woman from the other's kinship group. And this sort of links the nuclear families together into a town, into a tribe, into a society, eventually into a nation state maybe. Thus, the prohibitions have positive counterparts. The idea is of a reciprocal or generalised exchange of gifts which founds affinity. Now, the notion of the gift is very important in anthropology, especially coming back from Marcel Mauss. And as Bataille points out, he's got an interesting chapter on Lévi-Strauss called The Enigma of Incest. He says, Lévi-Strauss has given the institution of marriage a place in the overall movement of barter that animates primitive societies. He refers the reader to the conclusion of the admirable essay, The Gift, by Marcel Mauss, and says, this study has shown that barter in primitive societies is less a matter of commercial transaction than one of reciprocal gifts, of not solely an economic character, but a total social fact, religious, magical, sentimental, emotional. Generosity is the key, the paradox of giving away the coveted object, of adding value by renouncing it. So he's saying that by the father renouncing the daughter, he adds value to it. It becomes like the jewel that's given off as a gift. And he used the example of like a father sort of taking the daughter for himself. He's like cellaring a bottle of champagne and then drinking it by himself at the end of it. And so what would be the point of that? The point is to make a part of a celebration that links various tribes together. As I say down the bottom, let's just to get an understanding of the logic of marriage. We're going to have to say, obviously today's moral attitudes are going to be against that way of thinking, but we might still recognise that's the logic that has traditionally existed back in the time where men would roll like disco over here with a fair bit of body hair happening. All right, now, that is the last section on the sex module, having previously done the love module, right? So that leaves us with, next week, death. We're going to be journeying to the underworld, like Odysseus did, where he met Tiresias, and we're going to ask the questions about the meaning of death. There's a statue of Hades and the three-headed dog, Cerberus, I think it's called. And I look forward to your discussions in the chutes, because this is a very hot topic. Okay, so thank you. How you going? Yeah, good. Yeah. Did you guys get your essays back? Haven't looked. Cool. Sorry? You don't want to? Yeah, well, Patrick's taking care of it, so I assume they might be coming back today. How's the other class done?
Get two for the price of one, do you? Yeah? Oh, okay. I thought maybe you were near for the previous hour.